stunning. This EV with us on Tech Today, and of course, the location. This is the Audi Q8 e-tron SUV, an exclusive first look on Tech Today. We brought you out to the rugged outdoors because we thought this was an SUV which needs to be put through its paces. But while I'm also shooting, when the team takes a break, I've been thinking of updating my Instagram profile. And of course, I write tech geek, auto enthusiast, I love food, I love fitness. And I thought, let's make it sound a little woke, a little smarter. And I came up with a word that I found of late, thalassophile. You know what that means? It means someone who's drawn to the water or the sea. Now, I'm not really a mountains person. I'm more of a beaches person. We're here in the middle of Karnataka. I don't know where I'll find you that beach, but I've been told by some of the locals that on the other side of that mountain is a treasure. And I can satiate my need of being a thalassophile. You learned a new word on Tech Today, but let me tell you more about this absolute beauty and beast while we head out on a classic Tech Today road trip. Let me tell you something really interesting when we're talking about range anxiety with EVs, and that's because tech is getting so much better in these cars, and I think that's what Audi has been working on. Yes, the range is much improved when you compare this to the previous e-tron. They claim 600 kilometers, but I just want to show you what coasting on the highway is like. We're here, the scenic route, Nandi Hills, right here in front of us, but let me show you the range. Right here, a short while ago, it was showing 410, 411 kilometers. If I keep a light touch on the accelerator, it goes up to 415, at times even 416, 418 kilometers. So even when you're coasting in a car like this on the highway, the range gets better. When you use regen, the range gets better. And then when you have all these fast charging options and the charging infrastructure gets better, the range gets a whole lot better as well. That's all I wanted to say about range anxiety, which is mitigated to a large extent with the tech on display in this e-tron. While the cabin is fairly insulated and when you're driving the car, it really grips the road, very planted on the turns as well, and responds to even a light touch on the throttle. One thing about the Q8 is if I want to invest in an SUV, I want a slightly more commanding presence on the road. But for now, I think it is very comfortable to drive. That said, I'd be happier if it was a little higher and the design was a little bolder. Okay, first real test for the Audi Q8 e-tron. Is it a bumpy road? Yes, it is. Not the best road. Okay, you felt a bit of the bump, but it's all worth it when you have a view like this. This is genuinely why they say perks of the job when you are getting to review all these big boy toys. Greenery galore, verdant scenes all around us in this silent SUV. When you open up a GPS app, and not the Audi app, which we'll talk about shortly, most GPS and weather apps tell us we're in rural Karnataka. We're not too far away from Bangalore. I'd reckon 1.5 hours away, and it's incredibly silent on this weekday morning. Now, when you're driving this particular EV, it's also very silent. So a lot of EV manufacturers around the world find it, well, they understand that it's a little unsettling for us petrol, diesel vehicle driving enthusiasts. So what they've done is they've tuned sound profiles in many EVs. Now, you saw the i7 tuned by none other than noted Hollywood composer Hans Zimmer. That was something unnatural because you had all sorts of sounds with different modes. This one is, well, of course, an SUV, but the minute you do put your foot on the throttle, on the accelerator, it sounds like a spaceship. An absolute pleasure driving the Q8 e-tron on this road trip, but I want to take a little bit of a pit stop and tell you a little bit more about the car. Now, if you look at the design right here, this is the new Audi logo, and that's not all. It comes with a grille, which is actually very, very useful. Yes, these are actual air intakes, and Audi claims that they help with aerodynamics. Now, another thing that their engineering team has been working on is improving one thing the e-tron was slightly laggard in that department, which happens to be the most important thing in an EV, which is the battery pack. Now, this one has an improved battery pack of 114 kilowatt hours. And in terms of charging, one thing that I really like is a simple design thing. Reminds me a lot of how, well, Dyson does stuff. Join me on this side and you'll see that this is a double roll. We have another charging flap over here. So yes, the fact that there are charging flaps on both sides is something they've continued from the previous e-tron to this particular beast. And that's a concept, a design language concept called Simplexity, which is largely simplifying all the complex tasks using engineering, design, and tech hacks like this one. It's very, very useful. Coming back to, well, the OG on this side, very useful. And I'll tell you a little bit more about charging tech right over here. Now, if you want to juice up this particular e-tron, it's possible now in 30 minutes because they have improved their batteries by a fair bit. The Sportback has nearly 600 kilometers of range, and so does the SUV. The range improvement is nearly 32% this time around, almost 100 kilometers more. And how have they done this? They've essentially done this by increasing the density of the battery, and it's, well, a way in which they do battery stacking. Now, that's just their little bit of German engineering at work, but what it largely means for all of us is a lot more range, which makes our road trip, the rest of this, possible with minimal range anxiety. So you have two charging flaps, but there's two ways to charge this car. Of course, there's AC charging and DC charging. In terms of AC charging, if you have an 11 kilowatt charger, it would take nearly 8.5 hours. But if you double that with a 22 kilowatt charger, which works right over here, it would be done in 4.5 hours. But if you want to go with DC charging, this car can actually charge from 10 to 80%, and believe you me, in 30 minutes. Well, this is only the charging tech. There's so much more tech inside the car and outside. When it comes to the windshield, Audi claims this is an acoustic windshield which insulates you from the wind and air and all those noises. I have a feeling that at this pit stop, it's all right, but when we get to our next destination, which is going to be absolutely gorgeous, if Google Maps is correct, then there's going to be a lot more insulation needed, especially when it comes to my mic. But let me also tell you a little bit more about the lights. Well, over here, Audi claims that there's some digital matrix tech on display with 1.3 million micro mirrors. One thing that you don't want it to be is to dazzle oncoming traffic. I remember with the i7, we had so many of those Swarovski crystals. I always got worried in terms of how the projections are. But over here, they claim that it's not going to be as distracting for oncoming traffic. We'll test that on Mumbai roads on a late evening, maybe when we're driving back from the Tech Today studio. Very quickly, in the front, there is a very small pocket of storage space. But if we go to the boot, then let me show you more. Well, thankfully, it opens up in one single click. And because this is the SUV, there's a lot more space at the back. I think compared to the Sportback, it's also more conventional as an SUV. And a lot of us over here in India will love this, that you can also, if it's just you going on a road trip like me alone, or maybe a couple of you sitting in the front, then you can fold this and get a lot more space. The minute you get into the cockpit of the Q8 e-tron, it looks quite familiar. But of course, when I say familiar, I say it in a good way because it's premium, it's got that rich feel, and you feel like you're in control. There's no real distractions when you sit in an Audi. Everything is consistent. It's very different in terms of their approach from what BMW does, which is, I feel like, one notch above what Apple does with their iPhones and iOS devices, or what Mercedes does with MBUX. A lot of features which come in handy, but it's a very subjective sort of choice if you like it or you don't. Over here, there's this dual screen infotainment system. Nothing fancy and big like those curved displays in other EVs. Very utilitarian, very simple, but it all works efficiently and perfectly. Now, all the main features are largely the same when it comes to this particular EV. But yes, if you're talking about that adaptive air suspension, and if we go into the car mode, it has a bunch of modes in Audi Drive Select. For instance, if you look at efficiency, the car will be lowered down a bit. In comfort mode, for it to be hugging the road. Dynamic, so it'll be much lower, hugging the road, and then obviously changing as the geography changes. And then if you go on off-road, the car is automatically raised, and you'll see that the car is visibly being raised. If you look at the range mode, the range changes in all of these, right? If you are in this particular mode with 33 kilometers more of range potential because the air conditioner is on. For instance, if I was to switch off the air conditioning, let's see what happens over there. So now I switched off the air conditioning and the range potential has gone to 0. That's because there's no real way for me at this point to perhaps increase the range of the car. Now, range mode helps you to maximize the remaining range by limiting the speed. So that's perhaps one way in which you can obviously increase the range. If we're clicking on range mode, this changes everything in terms of the drive experience. Over here, obviously, you're talking about all the drive modes of the car. You do have these hard touch buttons which you can use for drive select. The minute you select this, you go back into that same mode. You can put traction control on and off from here. The best part about the design of this particular vehicle is this. So if you're traveling on your own and you don't have anyone for a road trip, as romantic as the scenery might be, this is the one hand you can rely on. And it's not just about, well, a drive into the sunset. What's amazing about this is that if you flick the gear knobs, it is the easiest with one hand driving, one hand on the steering wheel, and then of course P, R, N, D and sport mode all available over here. So this technically, if I put the car in drive, is my driving position. I'm going to stop just again over here because we're inside a closed sort of setup, so we can have a nice chat with you about the car. Yes, 360-degree cameras and all of that. And what I really like about this particular setup over here is that in this cluster over here, you get the range, and the range, like I showed you earlier, keeps going up. If you're using this particular knob right here, you get the consumption, short-term memory, what kind of average or mileage this EV is giving in terms of kilometers per kilowatt hour, and of course long-term memory as well. You can change the view, you can perhaps get your data laid out very differently depending on what really matters. But it's nothing like the other German luxury EVs. I mean, we saw what the BMW i7 is capable of with that AR sort of heads-up display, and then the AR projections here giving us turn-by-turn navigations. None of that. Like I said, no distractions. This is a car that you can be confident about. One, because it's an Audi, you can take it on the road without those distractions. And more importantly, when you do take it on the road, now that they've mitigated range anxiety, that really does go a long way in making you feel a lot more confident about this car. What a location, what a road trip with this SUV. And honestly, I have to either pinch myself and remind myself that this is an EV, or I need to do this. The charging flap opens on this side. Well, there's a charging flap on that side as well. That's the Audi concept of simplexity. I like that concept, the fact that you can make complex things simple using technology and all of these hacks that we've seen with this particular vehicle. It's very windy over here, so forgive me, but inside the car, it was very well insulated. Not like the Range Rover SV, where of course you have active noise cancellation and those microphones doing all the tricks, but the cabin insulation and the materials used, and just largely with the way the car has been designed, you can barely hear anything from the road, any unwanted, unnecessary sounds, and of course the rustle of the wind as well. But if you think about where this particular EV is placed, there's the Jaguar I-Pace, which didn't really pick up, especially here in India, in terms of, well, a like apples and apples comparison, that's the closest it gets. That is a great drive, but this one now has addressed the problem of range anxiety. There's, of course, that Audi Quattro four-wheel drive. That entire vibe which we're getting over here is only possible with this particular SUV. There's also a sportback version of the car which I think looks really slick, and we had some time with that EV as well. But the SUV seems like the more practical option. And of course, with India's obsession with SUVs and the Q lineup for Audi, which has done really well over the years, I think this is an EV which we will see on the roads. I actually hope to take this to Mumbai very soon, maybe the Sportback, and see what it's like with some of these modes, some of the engineering, some of the tech, and of course drive this at night to see what those matrix lights are all about. But all in all, it is very consistent with that Quattro philosophy and all of these small tech hacks. I think the Q8 e-tron does a fantastic job, especially when you're taking it out for a road trip. Now, I'm going to enjoy the sights and sounds, and you need to enjoy the rest of Tech Today. I'm going to see you on the other side.